experience, right? And there also has to be the thing in itself, which we essentially get from John Locke, right? That's the primary qualities must adhere to an actual object that I'm interacting with through my senses, right? So there has to be this thing in itself. But for Kant, you can't actually see the thing in itself, nor can you actually see the ego, right? You can't see yourself. This is something that not only Jung recognizes. Whenever I try to introspect and find myself, I can't find anything except the experiences I'm having, right? Berkeley had the same issue, right? But so I can't actually see myself. It's a hypothesis that there's such a thing as a me that's having this experience, right? That's okay. That's okay. Has to be there, logically, has to be there for the ego to experience something. It's my subjective side that's experiencing this stuff, right? But what else is part of the a priori? Remember that it's two words, a priori, right? What else has to be part of the way my mind experiences things in order for me to have experience, right? So it's prior to any particular experience that I have, right? Well, the first thing, which we've the first thing we have to have is the experience of time. Every experience you have feels like time is elapsing, no matter what kind of experience it is. Now here's an interesting thing, though. Does time exist as part of the objective world? Or is time something that we give to our experience? Well, Kant is stuck. He cannot say that time exists outside of our mind. It's a possibility. It's beyond what we can actually reach. Just like the thing in itself, we can't actually know time apart from the way we experience time. But every single thing we experience is experienced as if time is elapsing. So the first thing he says you absolutely have to have in order to experience anything is the experience of time. Time is elapsing. And by the way, it's kind of interesting to think of it as unique to the individual who's essentially giving time to the experience. The time comes from you, because we do share this idea that time can sometimes seem rushed, sometimes goes slowly. In other words, it doesn't actually fit that we think of time as a personal experience of the event, how time is going, right? So that's kind of interesting. And when we get to Einstein, of course, the idea of time comes from that individual who's the center of the universe. That's you, right? You're the X in that very middle that's experiencing, everything. And so time is actually your, your frame that your consciousness is giving to experience. And so we get that from Kant. It's not something that's out there, not in the sense of maybe a Newtonian, Sir Isaac Newton's view, that there's this steady state universe that's going through time. No, it's an internal psychological experience, right? And the second thing that we have to have that applies to things that have dimensions is space. We don't have to have a concept of space for something. There's a lot of things that we consider abstract ideas, right? They don't take up space. They take up time. When you're thinking about it, what is love? I can feel the time going by, as I tick the clock in my head, while I'm thinking about that. As I'm reading C.S. Lewis and thinking about the various kinds of love in English compared to the Greek, the storgy, the eros, the agape, and the, help me with the fourth one. What, anybody? What's the fourth one? Agape, storgy, eros, and philia. There you go. So philia. Well, any of those experiences take time, but they don't take space. So things that take space for us are only things that we think of as having dimension. But once we get that under our belt, the next set of things, by the way, before I forget, there's a Japanese festival. She didn't write festival for some reason. I don't know if you're interested in a kimono show or music or action. It's put on by the UAA Department of Languages and the Japan Center, and it's Saturday, April 27th from 4 to 6 at Diamond High School Auditorium. There is a charge, $10 for adult, but if you're under 18, it's free. Bring your own kimono if you have one. So I promised her I would share that with you. So there, I didn't want to forget it, which I could have. Okay, so once we have, let's go to, should we go to the Prolegomena? Oops. All of these, notice, are on the web. So that's I should point this out. Here's his explanation about David Hume. Hume started. This is Kant's Prolegomena, which I should point out, he first wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, or Reine Vernunft. Right? Rhine, remember the river Rhine? That means pure or very clean in German. Right? If you take your clothing to the cleaners are called der Reinigung. It's just the funniest one for me though was a muffler on a car is called an Auspuff. I just think that's hilarious. But so the Reine Vernunft, most people had a great deal of difficulty reading that book. As a result, a couple of years later, he wrote the Prolegomena, which literally means read this verse to help people understand what he had said already in the critique. But so Hume started from a single but important concept in metaphysics, that is, that of cause and effect, including its derivatives, force and action, etc. He challenges reason, which pretends to have given birth to this idea from herself, to answer him by what right she thinks anything to be so constituted, that if that thing be posited, something else must also necessarily be posited. For this is the meaning of the concept of cause. He demonstrated irrefutably that it was perfectly impossible for reason to think a priori, and by means of concepts, a combination involving necessity. We cannot at all see why, in consequence of the existence of one thing, another must necessarily exist. So cause and effect. It's a matter of habit. We're used to seeing this followed by that, etc. But is it a proof that there's a necessary connection between them? No, we cannot at all see why, in consequence of the existence of one thing, another must necessarily exist, or how the concept of such a combination can arise a priori. Hence he inferred that reason was altogether deluded with reference to this concept, which she erroneously considered as one of her children, etc. So I think I said, once people start catching on to this critique of cause and effect, as necessity. Scientists stopped referring to the things that they discovered as proof. So if they do stuff in a lab and they find this always seems to happen from this, they used to think they proved it, they demonstrated it. But after becoming familiar with this change in vocabulary, they realized they had to call it instead a hypothesis. Maybe a supported hypothesis, this supports this hypothesis. But they stopped referring to it as a proof. Because there's a problem with that, right? However hasty and mistaken Hume's conclusion may appear, it was at least founded upon investigation, etc. But Hume suffered the usual misfortune of metaphysicians of not being understood. And by the way, this seems to be an interesting problem philosophically. Kant's talking about this all the time. That there's a difference between individuals that are like common people that have common sense, which he doesn't highly regard, and people that are in the different faculties, and in fact in philosophy in particular, which by the way back then included a lot more things than it does today. In fact, when he talks about the faculty, he refers to 4 different faculties in the university. The one is the theologians. The second is the lawyers. The third is the field of medicine, doctors, right? And then the fourth is everything else that he calls philosophy. And he argues that philosophy is based on reason, using reason to figure out what is the case. Regardless of what we were told to believe, the folks in the philosophy faculty have to be using their reason in order to understand the nature of things and to progress what we understand. The other faculties are actually under the control of the government as far as he's concerned. So if you're teaching theology, what you say in a theological faculty has to be, you have to behave. You have to be in accordance with what the government says you're allowed to do. Remember, he lived in a tradition that was Lutheran pietist. So the church in that state was under the control of the state, right? The second faculty is the lawyers, and the lawyers, of course, are teaching the law. So the law is the law, right? And if you're questioning the law, you're not supposed to be part of the legal faculty. The legal faculty is just supposed to study the law and teach the law as it's written. You're not supposed to question the law to see if the law is right or wrong. It's interesting in our country where you've got the Supreme Court trying to make decisions regarding, say, the nature of whether or not abortion medication can be sent to people, even in states that don't allow abortion, right? That's an active issue in our country, but the way he describes it, only the philosophy faculty could deal with whether or not a particular law is right or wrong. If you're in the legal faculty, you have to only teach the law as it's written. And then the medical profession, they're basically required to understand the nature of illnesses. So that's what drives them. The reason that comes up is because one of the articles that he published got the censors upset in his country, and they criticized him and said he couldn't write again. And then he republished it, and so they were furious. And the king said, "Okay, bad, Kant, you can't do that again." And so he replied to the king and told the king, "You don't understand how it works. You're not supposed to say that kind of stuff. We're the ones that tell you what you can say." That's pretty amazing, actually, considering the time. And by the way, that was pre-critical Kant. In other words, before he was aware of David Hume's criticism. So that was part of his writing beforehand. That, by the way, if you're curious about reading it, it's really short. but it's on the web, and it's called The Conflict of the Faculties. It's on there somewhere. Maybe this is it. Oh, nope. Oh well. But that's what it's called. So if you feel like it, I can find the link at Hump, and I'll send it to you if you're interested. Short, but it's amazing that he's basically criticizing anyone that wants to censor the philosophy department. That's fascinating. However, so this is the famous